What if the price you pay at the gas pump suddenly skyrocketed because a neighbor decided to stop supplying your fuel? That's exactly what's at risk with Mexico's looming threat to cut off over 600,000 barrels of oil per day that the United States relies on. If the US and Mexico don't back down from their escalating trade war, everyday Americans could be feeling the pain in their wallets soon. The trade relationship between the United States and Mexico has always been crucial for both countries, especially in sectors like oil and automotive production. With Mexico providing over 600,000 barrels of oil per day to US refineries, any disruption in this flow could send fuel prices soaring, raising costs for consumers and businesses alike. But the tension doesn't stop there. The ongoing trade dispute is threatening to unravel this economic interdependence, putting everything from gas prices to car production at risk. As both countries take increasingly hard stances, the real question becomes who will blink first? And what will it mean for ordinary Americans when both sides refuse to back down? Let's dive deeper into why this standoff matters and how it could impact your daily life. We're witnessing an escalating trade war between the United States and Mexico that could have serious consequences for both countries. President Trump has made it clear that he is moving ahead with imposing 25% tariffs on Mexican goods, a move he's been threatening for some time. This decision is shaking the foundations of trade between the two nations, and it could have a ripple effect on the broader North American economy. Mexico's response is a game changer. They've threatened to cut off vital oil and energy supplies to the US, along with crucial automotive parts. What does this mean for everyday life? Imagine the cars you drive, or the fuel you put in them both, are tied to supply chains that span across borders. Mexico's manufacturing sector is a critical part of US industries, with the two countries heavily dependent on each other for resources. A trade war could lead to higher prices for goods we buy every day, from cars to gasoline. What we're looking at here is a major disruption to our daily lives as the US-Mexico relationship takes a sharp turn for the worse. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has made it clear that if the US tariffs go into full effect, Mexico has a contingency plan ready. This backup plan includes possible retaliation through cutting off oil exports or imposing tariffs on automotive parts that are key to US manufacturers. While President Obrador has hinted at a diplomatic route to avoid these outcomes, he's not shying away from taking strong countermeasures if the US doesn't back down. What's at stake here is more than just trade, it's the future stability of North America's interconnected economy. One of Mexico's strongest bargaining chips is its energy resources. The US relies heavily on Mexican crude oil to power its refineries, and Mexico's energy sector plays a huge role in keeping American fuel prices stable. If Mexico decides to cut off this supply, it could send US fuel prices soaring. But that's not all. Automotive supply chains between the US and Mexico are deeply intertwined. American car manufacturers depend on parts sent from Mexico daily, so any disruption in this flow could lead to shortages, delays, and skyrocketing production costs for car makers. Despite these threats, President López Obrador has chosen not to retaliate immediately. Instead, he's pursuing diplomatic channels to find a peaceful resolution. In a press conference, Obrador announced that he would speak directly with President Trump to discuss the tariffs before any concrete retaliatory actions were taken. This suggests that while Mexico is ready to fight back if needed, Mexico's leadership is hoping to avoid a full-scale trade war. However, Mexico's patience has its limits. If President Trump refuses to back down, Obrador warned that Mexico is prepared to announce its countermeasures in the coming days. At this point, Mexico is determined to hold the line. They've even leaked plans to impose tariffs on certain US goods, especially agricultural products. The idea here is that while Mexico is economically dependent on the US is also heavily reliant on Mexico's affordable labor and resource supply chains. So there's a fragile balance at play. Both sides have something to lose. There's also talk of Mexico blacklisting American companies in retaliation. This could have a significant impact on US businesses that rely on Mexican factories for their products. The automotive sector is particularly vulnerable here, as American, Japanese, and European manufacturers all depend on Mexican labor and parts for their production lines. A significant price increase on parts could drive up the cost of manufacturing in the US, ultimately affecting the consumer prices for everyday goods. From a political standpoint, López Obrador is gaining domestic support by standing up to the U.S. His tough stance on trade could play well with his base, especially as nationalist sentiments rise. On the other hand, President Trump's position on trade has been central to his political identity, with his claims that the U.S. has been taken advantage of by other countries, including Mexico. His base sees him as defending America's interests, but the risk of inflation and higher costs could lead to political backlash from American voters who are directly affected by rising prices. To make matters even more complex, Canada is also playing a role in this unfolding drama. Canada, in retaliation to U.S. tariffs, has imposed their own tariffs on American goods, and even China has entered the fray. Starting March 10, China will impose a 15% tariff on U.S. products, escalating the international tensions further. If Mexico joins forces with Canada and China, the Trump administration could face economic pressure from all sides. This could create a perfect storm, leading to widespread price hikes on everything from food to tech products to fuel. Now, let's take a deeper look at the impact these developments could have. It's not just about tariffs and trade wars. It's about the everyday products that we rely on. For instance, the US and Mexico are the largest trading partners for automotive parts, with billions of dollars worth of parts crossing the border daily. Mexico's labor market is a critical advantage for US companies looking to save on manufacturing costs. But what happens if tariffs increase, or worse, if parts are suddenly cut off? Car prices in the US could skyrocket, leading to more expensive vehicles for consumers and possible job losses in the automotive industry. This isn't just a corporate issue. It's an issue that touches all of us who drive or rely on the automotive sector. Let's break this down a bit further. The US-Mexico energy trade is another point of concern. In 2019, the US imported over 600,000 barrels of oil per day from Mexico, making it one of the US's largest suppliers. If Mexico follows through on its threat to cut off oil supplies, fuel prices in the US could soar, leading to higher costs for everything that relies on oil, including transportation and consumer goods. Even though the US has expanded its domestic shale oil production, Mexico's crude oil is still critical to US refineries, especially those located along the Texas-Mexico border. A shortage could lead to an inflationary shock across multiple sectors. The broader implication of all this goes beyond just fuel and cars. Inflation could spike across the board, as the US would be forced to find alternative sources for automotive parts, energy, and other goods that Mexico currently supplies. Consumers would feel the pinch with higher costs at the pump and for everyday goods. Additionally, US manufacturers may be forced to increase their prices to compensate for rising supply chain costs, further straining household budgets. But Mexico has its own economic vulnerabilities. Mexico's economy is deeply tied to exports, particularly to the US, which buys around 80% of Mexico's exports. If Mexico imposes tariffs or cuts off supply chains, they risk damaging their own economy as well. Mexican workers could face job losses, particularly in industries like automotive and electronics, if the trade war spirals out of control. Even with these risks, Mexico seems determined to stand firm, making it clear that they're willing to endure short-term losses to assert their position. So, what's at stake for both nations? Mutual loss seems likely, but both Mexico and the US are engaged in a high-stakes poker game, with both sides hoping the other will blink first. It's clear that neither country wants a full-blown trade war, but political pressures and the desire to appear tough on the global stage might drive both leaders to gamble with their economies. So, what does this all mean for you and me? If the US and Mexico do not resolve these tensions soon, we could see a serious disruption in our daily lives. From higher gas prices to increased costs for cars, electronics, and even food, the effects could be felt across the economy. But there's more at stake here than just money. The global economy is shifting, and this trade war could set the stage for bigger changes down the road. Will the US back down, or will Mexico's bold move force Trump's hand? One thing is clear: North America's economic future is uncertain. What's your take on this? Will Mexico's strategy work, or is it just a bargaining tactic? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more updates on this evolving story. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the latest developments.
Cause for concern. During winter months or times of geopolitical turmoil, the SPR has traditionally acted as a buffer to prevent sudden fuel shortages and price spikes. With the reserve nearly halved, consumers could experience longer wait times at gas stations, higher prices for heating oil, and even disruptions in electricity supply in regions that depend on petroleum-based energy generation. This scenario translates directly into higher household expenses and greater uncertainty about energy security. Chapter 7, Global Ripple Effects, Shifting Alliances and Market Dynamics. While the immediate focus remains on North American energy and trade, the consequences of these policy shifts ripple through global markets. Oil is a truly international commodity, and any disruption in the North American supply chain has the potential to influence prices and trade patterns worldwide. If Canada redirects its oil exports to alternative markets in Asia or Europe, the global balance of supply could shift dramatically. For instance, a 2 million barrels per day MBD reduction in global oil supply could cause Brent oil prices to peak at $92 per barrel J. In practical terms, this means that households across Europe, Asia, and even emerging markets could see their energy bills rise by 5–10%, further squeezing budgets and stifling economic growth. Globally, higher oil prices affect everyone. In Europe, where many households already struggle with high energy costs, even a modest 5% increase in fuel prices can translate into hundreds of extra euros per year in heating and transportation costs. In developing countries, where energy expenses make up a larger share of household income, the impact can be even more severe, leading to decreased disposable income, reduced access to essential services, and slower overall economic growth. Furthermore, higher energy prices tend to feed into the cost of goods, meaning that everyday items like food, clothing, and household appliances will become more expensive. Chapter 8, Political Fallout and Future Prospects. With an election year looming in the United States, the trade war has rapidly become a contentious political issue. Lawmakers are now divided on how best to respond, whether to roll back tariffs in exchange for concessions or to stand firm, even at the risk of triggering a full-scale trade war that could hurt both economies. Political uncertainty doesn't just affect stock markets and trade figures, it hits home for ordinary people. Prolonged uncertainty and contentious debates can dampen consumer confidence and stall investment, which in turn reduces economic activity. Recent surveys by the National Retail Federation estimated that American consumers could lose between $46 billion and $78 billion in spending power each year if certain tariffs are implemented. For everyday families, this means fewer outings, reduced discretionary spending, and potentially even job losses in vulnerable sectors. For instance, a study by the US, China Business Council, and Oxford Economics estimated that the United States lost 245 jobs as a result of the 2018-2019 trade war. The impact on household budgets could be profound. Lower consumer confidence means less spending at restaurants, fewer vacations, and a more cautious approach to major purchases like cars and homes. In turn, businesses facing uncertain demand may delay hiring or cut back on expansion plans, creating a vicious cycle of economic slowdown. Ending, as we have seen today, the potential cutoff of Canadian oil exports and the unfolding trade war over tariffs is much more than an abstract economic maneuver. It represents a strategic pivot that could redefine energy security and reshape the daily lives of millions of people. How do you see these changes impacting your daily life? And what measures do you think policymakers should take to safeguard both Economies? HTP at www.govp equals 43,995B. HTPs www.gov2.gov to spreg court ashkey f equals n equals spet ans equals at mzerop nus dpg. CHTPs www.kents